Hey, this is my second video about my experiences in this form called Marianne. I finished off with having had the experience of my husband making that journey in 1989, September 12th, 1989. He transitioned into the light and went home. I call it home now, but at the time I didn't know what it was. I was, again, very young, and I was living in a very small town in Illinois, south of Chicago, far south of Chicago. And when he crossed into the light, I told you in the last video, a man came and told me about him being there too, and having had an experience of peace and knowing that God was there. I had to dump every concept I'd ever been taught. Guilt, I worked on it anyway. I had to throw out. I was raised in a Catholic outright, and I remember I chose how I was raised. I really believe I wrote the script, so I don't blame anyone. I don't judge or blame my parents or anything. The bird's talking, so I'm gonna try and do this. He's out there. I was raised in a very Catholic environment, very old Catholic, where it was your fault. You had to suffer. In fact, I was told suffering would get you a higher place in heaven. So all of that had to go, but it took a while to get rid of some of this stuff. But my first concepts I had to get rid of were concepts of myself as a woman. I remember that was really important to me, to redefine my image of myself as a woman. And I remember a lot of studying of where Catholicism came from, where the first peoples came from. I was really involved in that because I really needed to dig really, really deep to dissolve a lot of what I'd been taught. I never really believed, even as a child when I was in Catholic schools, that the hierarchy of humans being on top and animals being down here, I always believed it was reversed. Even as a kid, I kind of had I'll call it a Buddha-like nature about non-human animals. I always thought, wait a minute, the nuns are telling me this, and yet the dog down here is at the bottom of the hierarchy, or the pig, they seem to be a lot more kind and gentle than the humans, so let's stick them up here closer to God. Where we got man, then we had woman, then we had, so I said, that's baloney, First angels, they told us angels, man, woman, and then non-human animals, and then the flora and fauna. And I would reverse that as a kid and say the flora and fauna and the animals kind of seem to be the most close to concept of love and God that there is. Humans are down here, so I had a different view as a child even. And I remember not quite believing what they told me. That doesn't seem right. But I went along. I went along with everything because I didn't want to rock the boat. I was a very quiet and shy and scared little girl. And so I just sort of went along with it, but never really bought into it. When I asked a nun once, could I be the Pope? She told me, no, you're not good enough. You're female, and that made me mad. I said, how dare you think that I can't be the Pope? I could be the Pope if I want, So I would be the Pope when I was a kid. I would pretend I was the Pope and wear a little beanie. So I was pretty rebellious, but without letting anyone know. I was very quiet about it. But I just watched. and I learned by watching. I watched, and I think, and I know now I wrote the whole script. I wrote the whole script. When I was really little, I remember looking in the mirror and saying, "What is that? Who is that?" Well, the universe, and I guess the script that I wrote, and I'm starting to realize up to this point, has been about who are you? What are you? What is this whole place? What is death? Death has been my life right now. That's been my whole life, and I know that now. That's the script I wrote, and so here I am in 1989, and and I'm sitting in this house in Illinois in a state of shock and trauma, and my kids are very little, and they're just totally flipping out, and I know I have to stick around for them, but now I don't have my husband's body standing there anymore, and I don't know what to do. But my higher self did. It had written the script, evidently, so it knew what to do, and it sent this friend of mine. He had been a teacher in art school, and I hadn't seen him for years. I mean, for like 20 years or maybe 15 years I hadn't seen this person. But this person, actually, I wrote to him and told him about my husband. And I had written to a few people. For some reason, I needed to get in touch with old friends. And I told him about my husband's journey into the light. At that time, I said my husband died, but I didn't talk like I do now. And so this friend of mine actually came and he was living in South Haven, Michigan. He came down in his car to my house and was standing at my front door. And he suggested that I get out of the small town in Illinois, and take my children to South Haven, Michigan. At that time, I was so deeply in trauma because I was really young and didn't know what to do. My mind was completely like I'd been struck by lightning, because I was so not aware of how this process worked. I'd worked in hospitals when I was in art school, and when I was in college, I'd worked as a nursing assistant in hospitals on part-time jobs, waitressing jobs, and I remember seeing people who had died. I remember taking people down to the morgue. That never bothered me for some reason. And I know now that those experiences actually helped in a way to understand that death did exist, the death of the body anyway. So this man comes to my house and says, "Why don't you move to South Haven?" And I just went along with it. I thought, why not? I don't want to live in the same town where the explosion occurred and have that in my face all the time. I could see the chemical plant from where my house was, so I thought, oh yeah, okay. So I up and moved within a 3-month period after my husband had crossed into the light. And oddly enough, later on I thought, oh, that was a terrible thing to do to my kids, drag them out of their hometown, drag them out of their schools, take them away from their friends right after their fathers, died, what a horrible person I am, But I now know that that was exactly what was meant to be. I was supposed to come to South Haven. Hence the 1984 dream of coming to South Haven. I never thought I'd see the town again. I never thought I'd see the place again. Again, the archetype of cutting through the jungle to find the ultimate love. I didn't know what the ultimate love was at the time. When you're young and you're in your 30s, you think it's some other person, or you think it's a man, if you're heterosexual. And no, it's not any of that. Mm-mm. And what's the jungle archetype, What am I cutting through? Well, little did I know, I got to South Haven. I was about 120 pounds at that point. I was really thin because I couldn't eat. Grief eats up calories. I was this very thin little wisp of a kid, and I had 3 traumatized children with me also. So here we are, and we don't know anybody. But again, my higher self started providing people coming into my life to help me get through that phase. And I was pouring through Joseph Campbell, pouring through every book I could get my hands on, because books that at that point were going to give me new information. And it was no coincidence that, those things just sort of showed up in my life, that I needed to undo a lot of the learning that I had had before from Catholicism and from the old way of thinking that I'd been taught, the egoic conditioning of guilt and blame and shame. And so I started looking really hard at the archetypes. What does this mean? What does that mean? I won't go into them in detail, but I learned a lot of it was just kind of rehashed symbology that I had learned in the Catholic Church that I was in, from older religions that were older than old religions. So it's like, wow, I know this symbol, what it really means, versus... Then I started realizing everything's symbols, so I started looking at things as symbols, but not as deeply as I do now, but pretty deeply. I was really getting into it. I was always interested in archaeology, even as a child, so I started, getting involved in that. The universe, higher self, Marianne, decided to send a really wonderful grief counselor to me at that time period. In the early 90s, I started seeing this wonderful grief counselor who explained to me and came in there, just like synchronicity, to help describe to me what grief was, what was going on, very practical terms, what was happening to my neurotransmitters, like I'd been hit by lightning, exactly what was going on. And so I was very lucky. Again, my higher self was working on, healing this very screwed up young woman. And and my kids were just a mess, because they were all, they had to meet new friends, go to school, figure things out for themselves. And I heard they saw this crying mother constantly. We all felt so, we were all co-joined, and terrified. Daddy was no longer in our presence, the strong one, the big one. He was 6'7", it was like we were terrified. I remember we were all lying and huddled together in this one huge bed when we first got here into South Haven, and we were all just, where's Daddy, where's our house, where's our home, it was like, it was really terrifying, as I recall. But I carried on and slowly gained back some weight so I could be healthy again. I had to carry on for my children, and that was a big knockout, but it was also the wake-up call too. And I know now that Bob and I chose, before we even came to this place, we both chose that this was supposed to be our experience together as souls. Later on, I did get married again to another man, and he too also crossed in a car accident, and he and I were very, very much alike in many ways. That happened years later as I was in this place in South Haven, and I was very angry at the universe for that one because it made no sense to me that I would have to do this twice, And yet, on the other hand, I realize now that that too was the story that was written by he and I before this. We co-wrote the script, and his soul is fine, and that he's perfectly alive. It took a while to, I was grieving that, and it felt like I was being thrown right back into the same thing, but I knew more by then. With my first husband, when he did make his journey, they asked me if I wanted to go into the hospital room. And I said, no, I can't look at him. Oh no, I was very young. Oh no, I can't look at him, can't look at him. But with my second husband, I could. And I went straight to the hospital emergency room. He had had a car crash. And he was lying there, and they told me he had lost his, he was a vegetative state. And I knew him, and he would never want to stay in a vegetative state. That this was a brilliant young man. And I remember rubbing his head and telling him, darling, go. But I could tell that he'd already taken off, And then I remember washing his body. That was just, my spirit really took over. And I didn't have a problem with facing it. So obviously I'd grown. I'd grown a great deal in regards to being able to have that experience of facing the body of someone and knowing that they could, and telling them, please go, if you need to go, go. And so when they took the oxygen ventilator off, he had already gone. He had already left his body, and I knew that. So I thought, okay, I know about this, a little more about this now. I can see him. So that was yet another wake-up call that everything's temporary in this place. This is not what's the permanency? Where's the permanency? Is there anything permanent at all? Is everything just transitory? And I started reading quantum physics because that was very important to me, to understand the role that there's no linear time. I needed to read about multidimensional holograms. I needed to read about the universe. I needed to read about the pixelated world we live in, or we imagine ourselves to be in. I learned to throw out the materialist, reductionist view of things. I learned about, that what's going on inside of me is what's going on outside of me. And they're both in the same place. As above, so below. Very Joseph Campbell-y, but I even went to his library, and I got that essence of his joy. I could feel that in there. And his library is co-joined with Maritas Kimbutas, because they became fast friends at the end of their journey here, because she was very much into the archetypes of the Neolithic and Paleolithic animism and goddess, god, religion, what people were up to back in those linear time, 40,000 years and ahead of that. She was very much into that and doing archaeoanthropology. I was fascinated by her. And good book she wrote called Goddesses and Gods of Neolithic Europe. So I wanted to actually look, past my Catholicism and go way back, because I needed I had to go way back to dump all the concepts, and it took a while. The concepts were still in there though. The guilt, the blame, the shame, the it's my fault crap, the judgment, still embedded in there. No, I found that out later. And no matter how much I read, you can have all this shit up here, okay? But you have to have the experience here in your heart to finally, get what you got up here. I mean, you can read it like crazy. You can say, man, there's so much stuff up here. Read. I could read 5 books a day. But until this happens, this doesn't mean anything. And it's like, I think it was Ramani Maharishi who said, or Nisargadatta, one of them, they're all the same to me, said, this is all flotsam and jetsam. Dump that at some point, because it's got to go to here. It's got to go to the experiencer. And I thought, man, I had all this stuff, and I still was in the jungle, like in the dream, trying to understand. And the next video will be about the nuclear bomb experience, which is the one that truly changed everything. So, and that is on my next video. And made everything pale in comparison that had happened to me before. Made everything just pale in comparison. So that's my next video, and I'll do that after I have some coffee. So thank you for listening to this. Okay, this is easier than writing a book.